You know, it's funny. 20 years ago, 4-year-old me was introduced to the X-Men through this series. That's right, true believers and newcomers alike. As of this year, X-Men Evolution turns 20 years old. A new milestone has been approached. New milestone has been eclipsed. Alright, let's go. Woo! Yeah! I'm getting old! But that's okay, because now is no time to be sad. Now is a time to celebrate. And what better way to do that on a low budget than for me to take a look back at this series as a whole. At the time of its release, this was quite an interesting time for X-Men. The 90s X-Men animated series had just barely ended 3 years earlier. The first installment to the Fox X-Men franchise had just been released 3 months prior to this series premiering on Top Dog Kids Network, Kids WB.
All new next Saturday at 10:30, 9:30 Central and Pacific.
And with the X-Men 90s series being super faithful to the comics and still being fresh in everyone's minds, a different approach was going to have to be taken for the series to differentiate itself from its previous iteration. From there, Boyd Kirkland was hired with the task to reimagine the X-Men and their mythos. He knows a thing or two about writing for superheroes, as he worked on a number of episodes from Batman the Animated Series. Along with Boyd Kirkland were creatives that had worked on other Marvel animated series in the past few years: Greg Johnson, Bob Forward, up-and-coming writer Christopher Yost, Tom Tatarnowicz returning as an animation timer only, and William Anderson composing the score. Alright, well, there's a lot of promise here with all these guys having worked on a couple of Marvel series a few years earlier, and doing the research on the respective characters. There's a lot going for the show already. With all that, let's see if this group's reputation makes for a good adaptation.
The time has come for a change.
Get in there, now!
Prepare to evolve.
Bring it on.
And now, Kids WB presents the world premiere of X-Men Evolution.
This adaptation takes a very interesting approach by aging most of the X-Men down to teenagers, and mutants not being known to the general public. Only a select few outside the Xavier institution know about their special gifts at the start of the series. Despite wanting to coexist with humans, Xavier has his students and teachers swear to secrecy, knowing that mutants will not be accepted by society. There's many X-Men that enroll into Xavier's institution for gifted youngsters, but the select few that get main character status are Scott Summers, Jean Grey, Evan Daniels, Anna Marie LeBeau, Kitty Pryde, Kurt Wagner, James Logan Howlett, Aurora Monroe, and Hank McCoy. Also known as Cyclops, Spike, Rogue, Shadowcat, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, Storm, and Beast. The Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, simply just referred to as the Brotherhood, are also major characters a lot of the time. Scott Summers is one of Xavier's first students and is a natural leader, much like in the comics. He leads the X-Men despite not being the oldest one in the group, but the oldest one out of Xavier's students. This adaptation is pretty much how I'd expect Scott to be like in his teen years. Standing up for others, leading the X-Men, courting Jean, trying to save the day while keeping secrecy, and sometimes acting his age. He is 16 after all. Despite this, I do think that Scott had some out-of-character moments from time to time, at least as far as I know Scott Summers' comic counterpart. Still, he's a good Scott Summers overall. Jean Grey, or Miss Popular as Rogue refers to her as, is most likely Xavier's first student. She's liked by everyone and is in a bunch of extracurricular activities. She's basically the model student that any parent would want. Even though this is the case, she does have some imperfections, for one, not knowing what she wants in terms of a boyfriend. This Jean Grey is a force to be reckoned with, but I can't say that this one was too developed on her own, but with Scott, has really good chemistry. Evan Daniels is a new character made specifically for the show, which I'm fine with original characters in comic book adaptations as long as they serve a purpose and have character. Evan is the nephew of Aurora Monroe and is mutant himself, so check. He's also a skater and a hothead at times. He's a slacker and doesn't really care for school. It's okay, Evan, I'm right there with you. He doesn't really hang around the Xavier students all that much, even though he gets along with them. He usually hangs around a group of skaters which rarely get screen time. Just because he's not around the others as much doesn't mean he's only out for himself, because he does form a close friendship with Kurt. While I do want to go further into this character's bio, I can't, so I'll discuss it in the spoiler section of this review. Rogue is... oh my god! They made Rogue a goth? I don't know what it is with Marvel animated series of the early 2000s, but they always had one character be goth in one of their reimaginings. Mary Jane in Spider-Man, the new animated series, was goth, and now Rogue in X-Men Evolution is goth. I got nothing against it personally, and in the context of the show, it actually makes sense. You date the show when you do something like this. But I digress. I don't want to get on a rant. Rogue is a goth, and in the context of the show, has her skin covered, because as you know, if you touch her skin, then your memories and abilities become hers, and you get knocked out. Her being goth makes sense now. She can't touch other people, so why not dress in clothing where your skin can't be touched? But I have to say, out of all the character designs that are drastically different to their comic counterparts, this probably takes the cake. The Southern Belle becomes the Southern Goth. I get it, they're trying to go for something different, but when I can barely recognize the character, and on top of that her personality isn't the flirty, confident young southerner. Instead, she's timid, at times a little hot-tempered, and she has a thing for Scott, which actually replaces the Scott-Jean-Logan love triangle that most X-Men adaptions have. Because, you know, this show wasn't written by Mark Millar. She's also the one X-Men to take the longest to come around and joining Xavier's group.
We've either earned your trust by now or we haven't.
You.
Welcome to the X-Men.
I don't mind this Rogue, I just would have liked it if it were more like the comic version. It's okay. It's okay. Kitty Pryde wasn't even in the 90s series, which is surprising to me because I thought she would appear at some point, but she didn't. So the show gets to utilize her all they want. And she's not really like her comic counterpart either, she's more so a early 2000s teeny bopper than she is being an intelligent and the youngest of the group. They got the youngest of the group part right, as she's 14 at the start of the series, but high intelligence, not so much, as she's kind of your typical teenage girl. I would have also liked to have seen her and Aurora's relationship take a mother-daughter turn, but it's non-existent. At least they got her relationship with Logan, or Mr. Logan as she refers to him as. They have a nice teacher-student bond, and she served as a moral compass a couple times, as he had a soft spot for her.
Do you really want to hurt me, Mr. Logan?
Despite all the changes they made, I actually like this version, so you get a pass this time, writers. Kurt Wagner appears from the very beginning of the series, which is fine with me because Nightcrawler is one of my favorite X-Men and had only a couple of appearances in the previous show. In this series, he's depicted as he was in his early comic appearances, as a happy-go-lucky guy. But there's not a single mention of his days in the circus or his Catholic beliefs. His origin is very much the same. He's shy at first, but opens a lot after the first episode. He's insecure of his real appearance, which is the most accurate design of them out of the X-Men for this series, but he has an image inducer which has him appear human. Even though he is a happy-go-lucky, charming guy, as the series progresses, he does show layers. In this series, he's probably the most developed character out of all the X-Men. Wolverine is a mentor at Xavier's institution and looks out for a lot of the students, even giving them nicknames. Kitty is Porkchop, Evan is Porcupine, etc. To them, he appears as a hard-nosed, tough-love teacher a lot of the time, which isn't true. Here's a few examples.
You want that paper?
That's why I'm holding it, bub. Bottle of water, too. Cold.
Huh?
Recycle that, will you? Not too shabby, Porcupine.
I mean, you felt it so strong that you couldn't even get the words out.
Yeah, once. Most beautiful bike I ever saw. I was so speechless, someone else bought her. Good job.
This Logan is in control of his anger most of the time and isn't nearly as violent. He's more reserved, but he does on occasion lose his temper, and when he does, he's just like the Wolverine we all know. As mentioned before, he has a soft spot for Kitty specifically, and doesn't really clash with any of the X-Men as he's not the wild card of the bunch in this series. He's not butting heads with Scott over Jean because this series was not written by Mark Millar, and is an old friend of Charles Xavier. This Logan is pretty cool and at times laid back. He doesn't know too much about his past, and he doesn't really get too much focus in the first season, but in season 2 onward gets enough development to the point where I can say by the end of the series, Wolverine is a developed character and is also a new but familiar interpretation. I liked this version a lot. Storm is a calm presence and Evan's aunt. Aside from that, there's not really anything else to say about this version of Storm. She barely got any screen time or focus, which is really disappointing because she has a really good character design and she's one of my favorite X-Men, yet she doesn't get any development at all. Depth, non-existent. What have you done to my girl? She could have been one of the greats in the show, but there's not really anything to say. That's it. She's two-dimensional. Okay, so you got one mentor down, but failed the other. What can I say about Hank McCoy, who is another one of my favorites? Well, he's not as elegant of a speaker as Beast is in the 90s series and talks more casually, but that's probably because he's speaking to teenagers a lot of the time, not adults. He is well versed within poetry and reciting them a lot of the time. He sympathizes with the adolescents at Bayville High, occasionally cutting his students some slack and being an easygoing, understanding teacher. He loves teaching and is a man of high intellect. Before Hank becomes Beast, he's introduced in the beginning of Season 2, hinting that he's well aware of mutants, because he is one, and even being approached by Charles years earlier. Having suppressed his mutant abilities through a serum and not living his younger years with the mutation like his 90s counterparts, but he becomes Beast when the mutation becomes too much and struggles with adjusting early on as he lived for teaching. He becomes a teacher at Xavier's institution and used a lot of the same tactics that he used at Bayville High, becoming a favorite among Xavier's students very quickly. With slight changes, this version of Beast is very much like the Beast that I know and love. Bravo to you, writers! Charles, or known by us as Charles Xavier, uses his mansion as a school for gifted youngsters and is someone that is always willing to offer his help, even to those that he had seen as enemies. This Xavier, much like the others, is a calm presence and is like a second father to most of his students. I do wonder, though, how deep are his pockets if the mansion gets trashed once a week? He's gotta be filthy rich. Mystique in this version has a huge temper and usually throws tantrums when aggravated, primarily when her group fails to defeat the X-Men or gain information about the X-Men. She's got it bad, and she's a real bitch too. There's quite a bit of backstory for her that's revealed as the show goes on, but no, this version of Mystique gets no sympathy from me, none at all. Lance Alvars, aka Avalanche, is the leader of the Brotherhood when Mystique isn't around. The character's personality and ethnic background is changed to him being an American. He's a rebellious teen who vandalizes property and has the power of geological manipulation. He has a thing for Kitty, and Kitty may have a thing for him back. He's also a bit of an anti-hero, at one point switching sides and then switching back to the Brotherhood. And he's the one out of the Brotherhood with the most heroic traits, actually helping people. And he also goes through an underrated, unsung character arc. Fred Dukes, aka Blob, may not look it, but he holds astounding amounts of strength and isn't really all that bright. Out of the Brotherhood, he's the one with the least development, but he does have a decent amount going for him. He doesn't like being made fun of or laughed at and is quick to attack. He's the most violent of the bunch, with most of his fight sequences occurring in a way where he might actually hurt someone. Even then, while he may not like to admit it, he does care about his fellow Brotherhood members. Pietro Maximoff is the most comic accurate of the Brotherhood members, with him even retaining his hairstyle. He's a fast-talking, cocky speedster who's not really much of a villain and doesn't really care for Magneto's cause, but does it anyway because it's a challenge and he loves a challenge. He has a rivalry with Evan, but it isn't expanded upon past Season 1. In the future seasons, it's like it was never there. And I can't bring up Pietro without also bringing up Wanda Maximoff, who is a late addition to the group in the last couple of episodes of Season 2, and is of course Pietro's sister, who he is afraid of because of her inability to control her powers in her youth, and also because she thinks that he betrayed her by not helping her get out of the asylum that Magneto put her in, which to me is one of the moments that sticks out the most in this series. I still remember the scene as vividly as when I saw it as a kid. I would have never expected a father of all people to do that to their own daughter. That's pretty f***ed up. Throughout the years, she was neglected and grew vengeful, bitter, and alone, which sets up an interesting conflict. See, she's already a reluctant antagonist to the X-Men. She doesn't care to fight Magneto or Mystique's battles. What she cares about is getting revenge on Magneto. And it's fair, she couldn't control her powers, so why couldn't Magneto have more patience teaching her how to control them instead of throwing her in a box and never stopping by to visit and show her that he cares? Her motives are very justified and sympathetic, especially during flashbacks. She's the last Brotherhood member added, and she had the least appearances out of all of them. Even then, she still is one of the most developed characters in this show. And now, ladies and gentlemen, true believers and newcomers alike, I saved the best character for last. And if you watch this series, you know exactly who I'm talking about. Todd Talansky, aka Toad. The homie Toad! Being the first mutant antagonist introduced in this series, he's been there since the beginning. And it was a pleasure watching this character. He's easily the most entertaining character of the bunch, and one of the most developed as well. My boy Toad just wants some respecting cash. Despite being on the villain side of the mutant conflict, Toad is so likable that I can't really see him as a villain. He's also one of the funniest characters and has a smart mouth attitude a lot of the time. Here's some of his funniest moments.
Hey.
Out of the way!
Oh, my lunch.
Hey, just leave it alone. You got it, Swamp Breath?
Jeez, what is this? Abuse the Toad Day? I heard about your movie. Check me out. Style, charisma. The Toad's got it all, yo. So start shooting already.
Oh man, he's at it again!
That door's gotta be made out of adamantium or something. Man, I take one shower a month and still I get no privacy.
Here, you dropped the soap.
You see? The camera just loves me.
Keep going.
She makes a guy wanna brush his teeth. Hey, if you can't be cool, be feared. My mom always told me that.
This character may be seen as comic relief, but he has layers. He had a number of sincere moments, with this one being my favorite.
I just want a chance to look good for Wanda, you know? Like you do for Amanda.
You mean like I did till you showed up?
Okay. But you know, hiding who we are is something you and me kind of got in common. Well, especially if it's for someone we care about. Come on, what do you say?
You can't not like this character. He's the best of the bunch in my opinion, and has a dope theme every time he appears. He has an attraction to Wanda, which she declines every time, but she slowly goes from not liking him to tolerating him. Those two being a thing is a possibility, seeing as there is no Avengers in this universe, which means no Vision to get in Toad's way. His interactions with the Brotherhood as a whole make for some of the best character interactions. I love it when an episode directs attention to the Brotherhood boarding house, because that's when I know I'm about to see grade A interactions.
Ow. Is that your final answer?
See ya, Einsteins. I'll be at school.
Me too. For my own safety.
Not a good idea, Boom Boom.
No way. We don't go anywhere we ain't wanted.
Since when?
These characters aren't evil per se, they may have antagonistic traits, appearances, and attitudes that aren't really conventional to most people, but that doesn't make them bad. More so just misguided misfits that try to hang in there, and on occasion, like causing chaos because they don't like the status quo. Even then, they all have redeemable qualities. I'm surprised the show didn't receive controversy over the portrayal of Magneto, who's more villainous than what I'm used to, and isn't really for mutant kind, but kind of selective of which mutants are with him and if they have a choice in the matter. On top of the fact that he abandoned his own daughter in her biggest time of need, this Magneto just seems irredeemable to me, and that's with the character having a number of redeemable moments in Season 2 and 3. This Magneto wasn't an antagonist with his heart in the right place, but was going about it the wrong way. He was just a straight up villain. Which segues to maybe my biggest problem with the show, which is the writing and how they adapt the characters. It's kind of a double-edged sword if you couldn't tell. Some characters are taken too drastically far or are too modernized, which is my problem with some of the characters, and then the others are faithful interpretations with slight tweaks and changes. The dialogue is iffy sometimes too, mainly with the teenage characters. I get that you guys think this is how teens talk, and maybe some will talk like Kitty Pryde or on occasion like Todd Talansky. But my advice for writing teen characters is to follow the John Hughes template. If it doesn't sound natural or too exaggerated, because times do change, how some teens were talking in the late 70s isn't how teens are talking in, say, 1997. I was in high school in the early 2010s, and how teens talk not 5 years later is somewhat different. Anyway, follow the John Hughes template and just have them speak naturally. They don't have to be too teeny bopper or too cool to be believable. They had trouble with the teen dialogue, but did just fine with the adult dialogue. Hell, some of it was pretty good at times. I also feel like they would come up with a solid story, but not really develop the characters as well as they would have wanted, which is a problem that mainly happens throughout Season 1 and occasionally in Season 2, 3, and 4. And one of my gripes that I listed earlier in this review could have been resolved this way, with some characters feeling very underdeveloped. They could have written stories a different way. A plot is the main focus and B plot is a side story in the episode. It is a show called X-Men, so they could focus on more than one character at a time and have two different plots ongoing in the same episode. That way they develop two characters in one go. Two birds, one stone. Sometimes they did this, but nothing was gained from B plot most of the time. Instead, most episodes would be A plot is the main problem and B plot is the others trying to solve it. By the time you're done with one of those particular episodes, it was either really good or really A lot of the episodes are what I'd like to call X-Men versus natural disasters, because that's what it mainly breaks down to. You could have used those episodes on something else, man. Anything. This is X-Men we're talking about. Not Rescue Heroes. No offense to Rescue Heroes, I fucking loved that show as a kid. Example, there's an episode where Scott becomes stranded in the middle of a desert without his shades, and he can't see because he's Cyclops. It's a bad idea. They did an episode like this in the 90s animated series, and it was done far better, and was more engaging. I hate comparing, but they're both X-Men shows and both tried a similar enough concept. I mean, you gotta make every episode exciting, engaging, and as memorable as possible. Make every episode count. You're doing a show on a Marvel Comics IP. They could pull the plug on your show any second. Sometimes I feel like they do it just for kicks. Marvel Comics hands out cancellations to animated adaptions, like how on a regular basis people are annoyed just by being around me. It's not a good thing, and it happens too often. I also feel like the show had one too many characters, especially in Season 2 and 3, and didn't really know what to do with them. The new recruits were kind of just in the background for a majority of the series, and the only one who got a little bit of depth and development is Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. I'll talk about him real quick. He's an enthusiastic young mutant who wants to go on missions with the big boys. Along with being a team player and having every X-Man's back, I do indeed like this interpretation of Bobby Drake.
Whoa, hey! Have anything to say for yourself?
Yeah. That's the last time I fly no frills.
Uh-huh. Come on, let's go.
Oh yeah, definitely the cool team.
Aside from him, the others barely get any spotlight, so why bring them in the show if you're not going to focus any screen time on them? I want to see what they're about too, you know. Okay, so stay with me on this. This show had its cast record in Canada. Production team of writers are from America, and the animation was outsourced to Japan and South Korea. Yeah, the show's production was all over the place, and it cost $350,000 monthly. The casting was well done, and the standouts to me are David Kay, Kirby Morrow, Brad Swale, Scott McNeil, Michael Kopsa, Noel Fisher, who portrayed Professor X, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, Beast, and Toad. They gave their all for their respective roles in the series. Also, if you're familiar with the Ocean dub of Dragon Ball Z, then you might recognize some of their voices, as the entire cast, as far as I know, is comprised of Ocean dub actors. Since this show was animated in Japan and South Korea and it was the early 2000s, there was a slight anime influence to the art style, and each X-Men, in a way, has the same costume, not retaining the suits that differentiate from each other like in the comics, but there is some nods here and there. At least Wolverine got his suit for the first 2 seasons. Now, while I will always be a substance over style kind of guy, instead of the reverse, I have to give this show credit. When it does action, it does it well. This show has way better fights and animation than the 90s series, and when the stakes match up with how great the action is, we get a high quality episode or 2-part arc. As I said before, William Anderson returned to score another Marvel animated series, with his previous credits being on Iron Man and the Fantastic Four. He composed another good soundtrack. I just wish I had full access to the tapes. What's the point of composing the music if it's only heard in the show? Why not release all of it to the public?
Uh-oh. Bad vibe.
Don't put me down or kick me to the ground. I'll be up in a flash, a superhuman blast.
Luckily for me, I did find a few of the music pieces for this one, but not too many. For those of you interested, the link is in the description box below. I love how early 2000s this show gets at times. It takes me back to a better time in my life. And the small details, like every time Lance uses his powers, a guitar note is held throughout, or the early 2000s-esque transitions, and of course, the clothing styles I could never forget. While this is a X-Men show first, that doesn't mean there aren't any references or cameos made from the wider Marvel Universe itself.
It should be no big. Why not just go to a party like everyone else? Just because I'm not like everyone else? I bet the X-Men get to go to parties.
There's munchies on the table, sodas in the ice chest, and don't break anything. Ex-girlfriend?
How dare you give Mark Millar ideas? A lot of good came out of the show, and a lot of new ideas and twists came out of it as well. One of which is being the very X-Men property that created X-23. Yep, they pulled a Batman the Animated Series and canonized a character that was originally created for the show and made canon in the comics later. That's the impact X-Men Evolution had. And yeah, I've been giving Mark Millar crap during the entirety of this review, but this show is what Ultimate X-Men should have been for the most part. A new but familiar interpretation of these beloved Marvel characters with all of them getting a fair amount of focus and depth. Every X-Men should have had their moment to shine. And while the show didn't do that either, it did for the most part, like I said. While not using the X-Men IP to its full extent, I have to give it a pass for being a fresh new take and not really being based off of any one comic run or era. I wanted to discuss spoilers to an extent, so if you don't want to be spoiled, click to the time on screen. One character that I've come to know as a vital character to any X-Men adaptation is Robert Kelly, who's usually a character that's in a position of power over our mutant protagonists, and he's also anti-mutant. In the comics, he's a US politician that has a anti-mutant campaign. In this series, he's even closer to the X-Men and Brotherhood by being their principal at the beginning of Season 2, and in Season 4 is running for mayor. All I have to say is what they do with him in the series is a interesting new take. Evan mutates further than the others and loses control of his powers and decides to stay with the Morlocks by the end of that episode. Also at the end of the episode is a plotline that never really gets brought up again. In the long haul, this should have taken a toll on Storm, but it's like it barely inconvenienced her. What does she tell Evan's parents? Hey, my nephew, your son, that I was looking after has mutated beyond our comprehension and is now living in the sewers with mutants that society has condemned because of their physical appearance. So cool, right? Another thing I really didn't like was how the Magneto-Wanda subplot ended. Instead of possibly having her forgive her father or Eric being genuinely sad about how he neglected her for all those years, he just uses Mastermind to wipe her memory and replaces them with happy ones. And that's it. She's no longer wanting payback. That's a really anticlimactic way to end that conflict, and even though I enjoyed that episode overall because it was mainly a Toad-focused episode, I just didn't like that one part at all. While Season 1 had a rough start, where I felt the show took off was in Season 2 with Mystique being gone, and the Brotherhood having free range to do whatever. And while Season 2 was pretty good, it did have some hiccups early on. Yeah, walk on the wild side. I try to forget that that episode exists. But the lead up to the Season 2 finale was great, and the Season 2 finale was even better. This is how you end a season. A sentinel attack on both mutant groups in the middle of the city, with mutants being revealed to the world, some of them being captured, X-Mansion is blown up, and the twist! The freaking twist! Hell of a job, guys! This two-parter left me on the edge of my seat as a kid, and left me on the edge of my seat even now in present time. Then the first couple episodes of Season 3 pick up where the Season 2 cliffhanger left off, with all mutants being hunted down like fugitives. The pressure is on even more than ever, and the cherry on top is my favorite episode of the entire series, The Stuff of Heroes. This episode caps off what happened in the Season 2 finale and has the X-Men, who are just teens, come into their own as they face off against the unstoppable Juggernaut. None of their mentors are present. Xavier is MIA, Wolverine split up from the group, while Beast and Storm plead their case. Everything that the X-Men had been taught by their mentors, from training in the Danger Room to any advice given to them to what they were taught to do when the chips are down, was put to the test in the climax of this episode, and it is awesome! This fight has a lot riding on it. The stakes are high, and it blew my mind as a kid. Even now it gives me goosebumps. These 4 episodes could easily make for one of the best X-Men sequels ever if they executed it properly. I'm not kidding. And seeing that one-on-one of Cyclops and Juggernaut in live action would make me lose my mind in theaters. It's gotta happen someday. Mid-Season 2 to early Season 3 is prime X-Men evolution. The ending of the series is satisfying enough and shows us glimpses of what would have happened had the show continued on, with the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix storylines next up for adaptions, along with the Brotherhood joining Freedom Force, Magneto joining the X-Men grown up. With Rogue flying, she must have crossed paths with Ms. Marvel, and Nimrod leading the Sentinels, most likely an adaptation of Days of Future Past. What could have been had they gone on for a couple more years. I'm satisfied with what we got, even if I wanted more. With that, I will give X-Men Evolution a recommendation. Well, true believers and newcomers alike, it seems this is the end for now. But until the day that I return to review more Marvel animated series, I leave you with this. Thanks to these 2 X-Men animated series, no matter which you prefer, I am now wanting to read up on these characters. So, if you'll excuse me, I have quite a bit to read. I'm Lino Mars of the MCA Productions crew, and until next time,
Excelsior!